The more I write these, the more I realize that it takes very little for a game to grab my attention. Having recently gained access to the website Lurkit, every now and then I'll look at what's available. Depending on what looks good, I'll check it out, and if I'm interested, I'll request a key. That's pretty much how I encountered Gimmick. Seeing as how there's a ton of modern retro-styled games out there, I didn't think of when Gimmick was initially released. It was only after I started playing that I realized that it was originally released in 1992, and that this version that I'm playing is a special edition. That really didn't matter to me because I was still set for what Gimmick appeared to offer. Right from the start, Gimmick's music and cutscenes stood out to me. I liked the vibes the music was giving off, and I'd eventually noticed that it really didn't stray too far from what was initially offered, but I was fine with that. It'd be worse if the music were jarringly different from level to level, but since that wasn't the case, I understood why it came off the way it did. I refer to Gimmick's cutscenes as cutscenes, but the truth is that they're pretty simple offerings. Knowing that this game was released in 1992 and on the NES, I'm sure that it was pushing the system to its limits. Still, I liked what I saw of these cutscenes. They were cute and they reminded me of early 90s computer graphics. Still, they had a different look and feel from what you'd consider to be a cutscene from the early 90s. Be that as it may, I enjoyed what Gimmick managed to do with its limitations. The cutscenes were straight to the point, and they featured non-verbal storytelling. I especially appreciated that because I'm sure that it was a forced choice rather than an artistic one. While that could be true, it still managed to deliver enough to draw you into what was to come from the rest of Gimmick. I'm sure that it's not the first time I mentioned this, but I really enjoy when a game has simple controls that have the potential for complexity. What I'm referring to is that I quickly realized that Gimmick's main attack, the launching of a star, wasn't how other games might utilize a similar mechanic. Shooting the star was more like using artillery and less like Mario's fireballs or Mega Man's Buster Cannon. At first this caught me off guard, and since I wasn't used to this, I realized that it was easier for me to just try to avoid enemies than attempt to take them straight on. The more I played, the more I realized that Gimmick's star could be used offensively and defensively in multiple different ways. It could be launched in more standard ways, but you could also shoot it off of walls in a particular way so that its path would either hit an enemy from a different angle, or in order to use it as a way of getting around. That last method of using the star was particularly intriguing. It's not only because I saw that getting the hang of it would take some time, but also because I was left wanting to see a more skilled player breeze through levels using the star in this specific way. That'd be especially helpful in Gimmick's speedrun mode. Since I wasn't as skilled with the star as I would have liked to have been, I saw brief glimpses of what it had to offer. When I did manage to ride it, I saw that I could get around faster than if I was just walking or jumping around. The fact that I had to rely on the ladder as my main mode of getting around showed me that basic movement in Gimmick felt slippier than I would have liked. This was especially true during sections that featured tight platforming. Feeling as if I wasn't in control as I would have liked to have been led to more deaths than I'd like to admit, but it wasn't to the point where I felt that it was preventing me from enjoying the game. On that note, it's worth bringing up some of the features in this special edition of Gimmick. Much like it's done with some re-released retro games, Gimmick features save states. I know that in the eyes of some, making use of this and other similar features would be blasphemous, especially since save states make difficult retro games more manageable. As I've mentioned before, I feel confident in my abilities as a player, but there are some games that really push my abilities to their limit. Most of the time it's just a matter of me dedicating the time and learning from my many mistakes, but the truth is that I no longer have the time I once did when I was a child or in my teens. Back then I could easily dedicate 3 months or even up to 6 on a single game because of how infrequently I received new games. In order to get more time out of a game, I'd put up with challenges that I'd consider unfair nowadays or even just not for me. I bring this up because this special edition of Gimmick had new features that made it easier for me to get through it. Without the save states or the rewind feature, chances are that it would have taken me 10 hours, maybe even more, to see the end credits. Thanks to using save states and the rewind feature, I was able to have the game beat after 2 play sessions. I was left with a bit of unease in regards to whether or not I really beat the game, seeing as how I used so many of its new features to help me advance, but I figured that if a game offers the option to make a game more manageable or accessible, it's all good. If I were actively going out of my way to make use of cheats or other workarounds, that'd be a completely different thing. What's worth noting from all of this is that it's clear that a lot of thought went into how to deliver what Gimmick has to offer to modern players. I'm sure that the devs that worked on this had different kinds of people in mind, but it wouldn't surprise me if I fit into one of those categories. The more I played Gimmick, the more I saw the number of options and settings it had. It wasn't just being able to change the appearance of its side panels, but also the specific mode you were playing on. You could play it on normal as I did, but you could also play without the benefits of being able to save mid-game or rewind. You could also play on a strictly speedrunning mode. Not really being a speedrunner or wanting to frustrate myself more than is necessary, I didn't feel the need to give these modes a try. Still, it's nice to know that they're available because they offer players more options to choose from. I realize that I've been discussing how this special edition of Gimmick made the game easier, but as strange as it may sound, I ended up thinking that its rewind feature still managed to offer complexity in its own way. The more I made use of that feature, the more I realized that it wasn't just about blindly rewinding to an earlier point in the game within certain limits, but that you had to know what point to rewind to and how to react once there. There was one boss fight in particular where I saw how hard the rewind feature could be to work with. As if one boss in a retro game isn't bad enough, this fight made use of back-to-back bosses. This is something that would be encountered to a higher degree later on in the game. It's not that I wanted the rewind feature to automatically make boss fights easy, it's that learning from my mistakes and knowing when to react was easier said than done. It was easy to rewind to a point just before I took damage, but I also had to analyze why I took damage in the first place, how to aim the star attack, and a boss's movements. I have no idea how many times I used the rewind feature during this one particular boss fight, but what I do know is that the number is pretty up there. The boss fight was just a small taste of how much endurance would be necessary to advance. Towards the end of Gimmick, there was a boss gauntlet. I'm pretty sure that it was 2 mini-bosses which gave you a taste of what was to come from the final boss, but they still offered enough of a challenge to leave me having to really think things through. In most of these retro games, it's about hitting an enemy a set number of times or completing a specific action. The truth is that it's easier said than done. This was mainly due to how these mini-bosses and the eventual final boss moved around, but also because I was fighting against the hard-to-use star attack. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the star attack was hard to use because it was poorly designed, but it's due to the fact that it takes getting used to, and also because it can be used very precisely when/if mastered. This boss gauntlet was a mix of fun and difficulty. I knew that I had to hit them with my star, but the problem was that sometimes it wouldn't reach high enough, or it'd be rendered useless as a result of the enemy's attack. As big of a headache as that was to deal with in the moment, mainly because I was having to juggle multiple different things at the same time, I recognized that it was fair. If anything, it was more than fair thanks to me being able to rely on save states and rewinding. I can only begin to imagine how frustrating it must have been to have played the original version back in the day, or to play it now with all the helpful settings off. I'll probably sound like a wuss for admitting this, but even with the help, Gimmick was challenging. It's not the hardest game I've recently played, but it also wasn't a walk in the park. As I mentioned before, Gimmick could be made even harder, but personally, I don't see the point in that. A player that wants more of a challenge could be interested in that, but I'm not the kind of player that regularly wants to make a challenging game even more challenging. Gimmick is the kind of game that childhood version of me would have really loved. First of all, it's a platformer. More importantly, it's really fun, colorful, and offers great gameplay. It's for sure lacking in areas that are assumed to be present in modern or even later era retro games, but understanding when and where Gimmick was originally released makes it so that it can be forgiven. Besides the reasons I already stated, what's great about this version of Gimmick is that it has so many options to work with. Whether it be making the game easier or harder than it needs to be, I like being in control and deciding for myself. There's nothing wrong with hard games that are set in stone and offer no workarounds, but at the same time, being able to choose how to play makes it so that a game such as Gimmick can be enjoyed by more than one particular kind of player. Though I didn't get a lot of playtime from Gimmick, I still got a lot out of it. While I don't think it's a general recommend, I know that there's plenty of players out there today that'll enjoy what Gimmick has to offer, whether it be fans of precision platformers or retro fans that weren't aware that this game even existed. If you happen to fall into either of those groups or you're simply intrigued by what it has to offer and what I've discussed, feel free to give Gimmick a try. Thankfully, it's available on Switch, Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox. Have you ever felt bad for using basic mechanics or features in a game, especially if it makes things easier for you? What are your thoughts on arguably obscure retro games being re-released? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.